The Sullivan estate glimmered with the kind of wealth that looked effortless, though in truth it had been polished and curated to impress. Chandeliers spilled golden light across marble floors. Music floated faintly from a string quartet in the ballroom, and the air carried the clink of glassware, laughter too sharp, and the heavy scent of imported cigars. Outside, in the manicured garden, lanterns glowed among hedges trimmed into perfect symmetry, their soft halos casting the place in a dreamlike shimmer. Guests drifted in clusters, sipping champagne and murmuring about stock prices and clinical trials as though the future of the world depended on their hushed words. And in the midst of this spectacle, unseen and unconsidered, a small boy sat beneath the oldest oak tree on the property. His black shoes dangled above the marble bench, his suit jacket too stiff on his narrow shoulders. 6-year-old Oliver Sullivan looked like a portrait, silent still, too perfect for his age. He tugged absently at the hearing aid tucked in his pocket, refusing to wear it despite his stepmother's constant scolding. What good was an instrument that made voices louder if no one ever spoke to you in the first place? Oliver had been deaf since birth, and in the Sullivan household that meant something close to invisible. The adults either ignored him or exaggerated their mouths when they spoke, as if he were too stupid to understand, as if silence had stolen his intelligence as well as his hearing. They underestimated him. They always had. What no one realized was that Oliver had become an expert at noticing the details others dismissed. He studied hands, eyes, posture, lips that moved too quickly, smiles that vanished the instant backs were turned. He saw how power shifted like a game of cards across the garden. He saw how his father's jaw tightened when Vivian touched his sleeve, how the investor's laughter rang hollow, how the servants moved like shadows to clean spills before anyone noticed. Most of all, Oliver noticed Vivian. She was striking, always draped in silk or velvet, her crimson lips sharp against pale skin. To the guests she was charm embodied, quick to laugh, quicker to flatter. To Oliver she was a presence that pressed down on the air, a hawk circling a rabbit. Her gaze was too calculating, her smile a shade too polished. She insisted the boy wear his hearing aid whenever guests visited, calling it good manners. He refused, and when she smiled at him across the garden, the expression never reached her eyes. It was the night before the garden party that Oliver first saw her slip into his father's study. He had crept from bed for a glass of water and paused at the top of the stairs. The door, always locked, hung ajar. Inside, Vivian's silhouette moved against the lamplight, graceful as ever, though her hands were quick, furtive. She opened his father's desk and removed a slim folder, sliding it into her handbag with a practiced ease. When she left, she closed the door softly, her heels silent on the carpet, never realizing a pair of watchful eyes had followed her every move. Oliver knew the papers were important. His father had spent nights bent over them, lips tight, brow furrowed. They had something to do with medicine. Oliver had caught words like trial and liability when he practiced his lip reading from the staircase. He didn't understand the specifics, not yet, but he understood enough. Vivian had taken something that didn't belong to her. Something that mattered. He wanted to tell his father, but how? Theodore Sullivan was always at the office or locked away on calls or speaking to Oliver in halting gestures he never finished. On the rare occasions Oliver signed with urgency, his father grew impatient, fumbling with the language like it was a puzzle with missing pieces. His gaze always drifted back to Vivian, who stood nearby with her cool, reassuring touch as if to say, "Don't worry about the boy." He doesn't understand, but Oliver understood far more than they gave him credit for. Now sitting beneath the oak as laughter peeled across the garden, he watched Vivian from a distance. She stood surrounded by men in tailored suits, her hand brushing a champagne flute, her mouth curving into a smile as false as glass. Oliver clenched his fists in his lap, remembering the papers, the way she had glanced over her shoulder before slipping them away. He could not speak of it. He could not tell anyone. His silence, the silence he had lived with since birth, had become his prison. Yet even within that prison, Oliver knew one truth. He had seen what others had not. And one day, when the right moment came, his silence might become his greatest weapon. The garden looked like something out of a storybook that night, glowing under strings of lanterns and the soft wash of moonlight. Conversations swelled like waves and broke into bursts of laughter, too loud, too sharp, as the men in tailored suits congratulated each other on deals Oliver couldn't hear. The air carried the clatter of crystal glasses and the heavy perfume of roses cultivated by gardeners who were paid more attention than the master's own son. Oliver sat perfectly still, a boy-shaped shadow at the edge of a gilded world. His small fingers pressed against the cold marble of the bench beneath the oak, grounding himself. He didn't need his hearing aid to know he was invisible. His father hadn't looked his way once that evening. He thought of his mother, whose gentle hands had signed lullabies to him every night until she was gone. Since her death, the house had been quiet in a way even Oliver hated. A silence not of sound, but of love. Movement caught his eye. At first, he thought it was a rabbit darting through the hedges, or one of the gardener's children who had strayed where they shouldn't. But then the leaves shivered, and out slipped a girl. She didn't belong here. Her hair was wild, a copper tangle that caught the light like fire. Dirt smudged her cheeks, her dress was wrinkled, and she clutched a worn backpack like a shield. Oliver's heart lurched. No children ever came to these parties. Guests' offspring were kept at boarding schools or paraded in stiff collars beside their mothers. This girl looked like she had stepped straight out of the city and into another universe. She froze when she saw him, perched stiff and solitary beneath the tree. Her eyes widened, but not in pity, not in the way most people looked at him when they realized he was deaf. She tilted her head, studying him as though he were not broken but mysterious, and then her hands began to move. "Hello?" Oliver's breath caught. She was signing, not clumsily, not like someone who had learned a few words out of obligation, but fluidly, naturally, as though the language had always been hers. "I'm Ruby," she signed with quick, sure fingers. "Why are you sitting all alone?" His hands trembled as he answered. "You know ASL?" Ruby grinned, and in that grin was mischief and light, a missing front tooth peeking through. "My aunt is deaf. I've been signing since I was 3. She plopped down beside him without invitation, pulling her knees up as though the marble bench were her own. "Is this your house?" "It's huge. Like a castle," Oliver stared. No one had ever approached him this way, not without hesitation, not without fear of making a mistake. He signed back cautiously. "Who let you in here?" Ruby's eyes sparkled with something dangerous and delightful. "Nobody. I found a hole in the hedge. I live in the apartment building behind your property." Mom's working her second shift, and Mrs. Ramirez, who's supposed to be watching me, fell asleep. I got bored. She said it as though sneaking into a millionaire's estate was no more remarkable than hopping a fence at the park. Oliver felt the corner of his mouth tug upward, in the closest thing he'd had to a smile in weeks. "You should go before they see you," he warned, glancing toward the crowd where Vivian's crimson lips parted in another practiced laugh. "If they catch you, they're too busy with their boring grown-up stuff," Ruby cut in, waving a hand. "What's the meeting about anyway?" They looked serious. Oliver hesitated. This was the secret that had been burning inside him for days, the knowledge he carried with no one to share it with. His father wouldn't listen. Vivian was the enemy, and there were no other children here, no one who spoke to him in the only language that mattered. His hands moved quickly, urgently. "My stepmother is doing something bad. I saw her. She took papers from my father's office. She's selling secrets to another company. Medicine secrets. Dangerous ones." Ruby's eyes widened, her face alight with something between fear and wonder. "Like a villain in a movie, for real?" Oliver nodded, the weight of it pressing down on his small shoulders. "She's meeting someone tonight. Someone from Meridian Biotech. Shouldn't you tell your dad?" Ruby asked, her fingers slowing as the gravity of the conversation sank in. Oliver's expression darkened. "He doesn't listen to me. Not since he married her." Ruby looked at him for a long moment, her eyes softer now, less mischievous. "Ever wonder what it feels like to know something terrible is about to happen, but no one will believe you?" Oliver's throat tightened, though no sound came. She had put into words the very prison he lived in every day. Ruby leaned closer, her voice lowering, though she continued to sign. "Then we'll make them believe you. We can catch her red-handed." Oliver blinked at her, stunned by the certainty in her tone. Before he could reply, a chill prickled the back of his neck. Across the garden, Vivian's gaze had found him. She was watching. Her smile curved too slowly, too perfectly. When Theodore Sullivan joined her, asking what she was staring at, she shifted instantly, feigning concern. Just looking at Oliver, her painted lips murmured, He seemed so lonely over there. Theodore squinted, seeing only his silent son beneath the oak. Ruby had slipped behind the bench like a fox vanishing into underbrush, unseen by adult eyes. Vivian's lips pressed into a line as she turned away, but Oliver had seen it. That smile, sharp and dangerous, meant she had noticed, and she did not like what she saw. The Sullivan mansion at night was not the same house it was during the day. By daylight it gleamed, a palace of white stone and shining windows. But after dark, when the party sound softened and the servants busied themselves in distant halls, the estate became something else entirely. A labyrinth of shadowed corridors, silent rooms, and secrets hidden behind locked doors. Oliver knew this house better than anyone. He knew which stairs creaked, which light fixtures buzzed faintly when the bulbs flickered, which doors were always locked and which ones Vivian forbade him to enter. He also knew where his father's study was, second floor, east wing, a room that smelled faintly of cigar smoke and old leather, with walls lined by shelves that reached the ceiling. It was where Theodore Sullivan lived half his life, the other half buried in boardrooms and business trips. To Oliver, that room was sacred. It was the last place he had ever seen his father smile, before Vivian arrived. Tonight it was forbidden territory, which meant it was exactly where they needed to go. Ruby padded beside him, her sneakers making no sound against the plush carpet. She had pulled a hairpin from her tangled curls and twirled it between her fingers with a grin that unsettled Oliver. She looked like a thief from a storybook, wide-eyed and fearless, as if breaking into the most dangerous woman's private study was nothing more than a game. At the top of the back staircase, Oliver hesitated. The corridor stretched before them, dimly lit by sconces, its silence heavy. He signed, "If she catches us, we're finished." Ruby signed back without hesitation. "If we don't try, she wins." That was Ruby. Reckless courage in a girl who lived in a cramped apartment behind the hedge but carried herself as though she could command kingdoms. Oliver wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe someone could outwit Vivian Sullivan. They crept down the hall. The door loomed at the end, polished oak with a brass handle. Oliver's stomach twisted. He reached out to stop Ruby, but she was already kneeling by the lock, slipping the pin inside with practiced precision. "How do you know how to do that?" Oliver mouthed, though no sound came. Ruby smirked without looking up. She didn't need to sign to answer. A soft click filled the silence and the heavy door gave way. Inside, the study was immaculate, almost unnervingly so. Every book was aligned, every paper stacked, the crystal decanter on the desk gleaming as though it had never been touched. The air smelled faintly of Vivian's perfume, a sharp, sweet note that didn't belong to this house. Ruby moved first, rifling through drawers with quick, clever hands. Oliver lingered near the door, his pulse racing. He scanned the room with the eyes of someone who had always been ignored, always forced to observe. And then he saw it. A locked drawer at the bottom of the desk, its brass keyhole glinting in the lamplight. He pointed. Ruby dropped to her knees instantly, jiggling the lock with her hairpin. Minutes stretched, every second an eternity, until at last the drawer slid open. Inside lay a slim folder bound in leather, the kind his father used for documents too important for loose paper. Ruby flipped it open on the desk. Oliver leaned closer, his heart hammering. He couldn't read all the words, not yet, but he recognized enough. Clinical trial reports, lab results, emails printed out and highlighted in Vivian's neat, slanted handwriting, and a name that appeared again and again, Meridian Biotech. Ruby's eyes widened as she skimmed the first page. "This looks bad," she whispered, though Oliver couldn't hear her voice. She signed the word instead, dangerous. Before Oliver could answer, the air shifted. A faint sound, footsteps in the hall. His body froze. He grabbed Ruby's wrist, signing frantically. "Hide." They scrambled beneath the desk, pulling the chair in front of them as the doorknob turned. The perfume hit first, that same sweet, suffocating note. Vivian entered the study. Oliver's heart pounded so hard he thought she might hear it, though he knew she couldn't. From their hiding place, he saw her crimson heels cross the carpet, heard the soft creak of the desk as she sat. Papers rustled. The lock clicked shut again. She was putting something away, or checking to see if it was missing. Oliver dared a glance. Her face was a mask of calm perfection, but her hands moved with precision, sharp as blades. She was hiding something, protecting it. Ruby squeezed his hand, her dirt-smudged fingers anchoring him. Oliver didn't breathe. If Vivian leaned down, if she so much as reached for the drawer, they would be caught. Minutes felt like hours. At last, Vivian stood, smoothing her silk dress. She glanced at her reflection in the darkened window, adjusting her lipstick. Then she left, closing the door softly behind her. The silence that followed was crushing. Ruby exhaled in relief, her grin returning. That was close. Oliver didn't sign back. His fists were clenched so tight his nails cut into his palms. He had just seen proof that his stepmother was not simply cruel, not simply distant. She was dangerous. Ruby leaned closer, eyes gleaming with something fierce. Now we know, but what are we going to do with it? Oliver didn't answer. He only knew one thing. Vivian Sullivan was hiding something far worse than stolen papers, and if they didn't stop her, no one would. The house seemed quieter the morning after the party, but it was not the kind of quiet Oliver liked. It was a suffocating quiet, like a stage after the audience has left, leaving only empty chairs and shadows. The Sullivan mansion had always been too big, too hollow, but lately it felt like a place designed to swallow sound, to erase voices. Oliver stood outside his father's study, fists clenched at his sides. The door was half open, and from within he could see Theodore Sullivan hunched over his desk, tie loosened, his hands covering his face. Papers lay scattered across the desk, along with a half-finished glass of whiskey. His father looked older than Oliver remembered, the kind of older that came from grief more than years. Oliver pushed the door wider and stepped inside. His father lifted his head, startled, then sighed when he saw who it was. He gave a tired smile, though it was faint, like a candle struggling against the wind. "Oliver," Theodore said, his voice heavy. He spoke too quickly, not bothering to slow his words or look at Oliver directly so he could read his lips. To him, it was enough that he said the boy's name. Oliver's chest ached. He wanted to scream that it wasn't enough, that he needed his father to really see him. Instead, he forced himself forward, tugging at his father's sleeve until Theodore finally looked down, confusion in his eyes. Oliver signed with urgency. "Vivian is stealing. She's taking papers. She's working with Meridian Biotech. She's dangerous. Dad, please, you have to believe me." Theodore frowned. He shook his head slowly, his brow furrowing as though Oliver were babbling in a language he didn't understand, which of course he was. Sign language had never come easily to him. Tutors had tried, but grief and work had swallowed the lessons whole. "Slower, Oliver," Theodore muttered, rubbing his temples. I don't understand what you're saying." The boy's frustration burned hot in his chest. He signed again, sharper this time, his small hands flying with desperate precision. "She's lying to you. She's going to hurt the company, hurt people. She stole papers from this room, I saw her." Theodore stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair. "Oliver, please," he said, voice rising in exhaustion. "Not now. I have too much to deal with." He tried to smile again, though it wavered. "Your stepmother has been trying so hard to make this easier for you. She worries about you. She's the one who—" Oliver shook his head violently, tears stinging his eyes. He signed with everything he had. "No, she's not helping. She's lying. She's lying." But his father didn't see, didn't want to. Behind them, the door creaked. Vivian's reflection appeared in the glass cabinet across the room before her voice followed, smooth and sweet as poison. "What's all this fuss?" She drifted inside as though she belonged to the air itself, her silk robe trailing behind her. She placed a manicured hand on Theodore's shoulder and kissed his temple, her eyes never leaving Oliver's face. "He's upset again," Theodore muttered, rubbing his forehead. "I don't know what he's trying to tell me." Vivian crouched slightly, lowering herself to Oliver's height, her crimson lips curving into a mask of sympathy. "Oh, darling," she said slowly, over-enunciating as though speaking to a child who couldn't possibly understand. "You mustn't upset your father. He's under such pressure." Her hand reached out, brushing his hair back with mock tenderness. Her eyes, though, burned like knives. Oliver jerked away, glaring, signing furiously. "You're pretending. You're lying." Vivian tilted her head, pretending not to understand. Then she turned to Theodore with a small, pitying sigh. "He refuses to wear his hearing aid, It makes communication so difficult. I keep telling him, but—" She trailed off, shaking her head as though it were Oliver's fault. Theodore looked torn, exhausted. He kissed his wife's hand absently, the way one clings to the nearest lifeline. You're right, maybe. Maybe we should call the tutor again. He broke off, unable to finish, his grief and guilt pressing down on him. Vivian's smile widened, triumphant. She squeezed his hand and then looked back at Oliver, her eyes cold, gleaming with unspoken threat. Oliver stood frozen, heart pounding. He had tried so hard to make his father see. But his words, his hands, his desperate warnings had all dissolved into silence. Ruby had been right. His father would never believe him. Not alone. Later, when Vivian left the study, Oliver lingered in the hallway, trembling with rage and helplessness. The house seemed darker than ever, the silence pressing in. Ruby appeared from the shadows, her copper curls messy, her eyes sharp with determination. "What happened?" she signed. Oliver's hands shook as he answered. "He won't listen. He never will. She makes him believe her." Ruby's gaze hardened. For a moment she looked far older than 7. She signed slowly, deliberately. "Then we don't tell him. We show him. We'll make him see." The boy's breath hitched. There was fire in her hands and her certainty, a fire he had never known. For the first time in days, a spark of hope flickered inside him. But deep in the house, he could still smell Vivian's perfume, sweet, cloying, poisonous. She had won this round. And Oliver knew. If they didn't act soon, his silence would not only be his prison. It might become his grave. The Sullivan mansion never truly slept. Even after the last guest's laughter had faded, even after the final champagne flute had been cleared away, the house hummed with the quiet labor of servants and the endless echo of wealth. But past midnight, when the lights dimmed and only a few lamps glowed in the halls, the place felt transformed. The corridors stretched too long. The shadows thickened. Every creak of the old wood seemed to whisper secrets. Oliver crept through the darkness with Ruby at his side, his bare feet making no sound against the carpet. He knew the house better than anyone. He knew how to avoid the guards stationed near the gates, how to slip past the staff quarters without being seen. Tonight, though, his heart pounded harder than ever before, because tonight they weren't sneaking to play or to spy. Tonight they were chasing proof. Ruby walked with the same fearless energy she always had, but even she seemed changed by the shadows. Her copper hair caught the faintest gleam of moonlight, and her eyes were alight with determination. She clutched her battered notebook against her chest, the one she used for doodles and secrets now ready to hold evidence of betrayal. Oliver had told her Vivian's meeting was tonight. He had overheard her lips forming the words, "Midnight, Meridian, East Wing." He wasn't sure if Ruby fully understood the danger, but she didn't hesitate. When he had confessed his doubts, she had only signed, "We'll never know if we don't look, and if we don't look, she wins." So they went. They reached the East Wing balcony where the garden stretched below, silver in the moonlight. A figure stood at the balustrade, wrapped in a silk robe that shimmered like liquid. Vivian. Her crimson lips moved, poised and perfect, though no sound reached Oliver's ears. For once he didn't need sound. He could read the sharp curve of her mouth. Delivery by Friday. Ruby crouched low behind the stone railing, tugging Oliver down beside her. She flipped open her notebook, her pencil poised. "What is she saying?" she whispered, though she signed the question too. Oliver's eyes locked on Vivian's mouth. He translated with his hands. "She's telling him the trials failed, that the drug is dangerous, but she's hiding it, selling it anyway." From the shadows beyond the balcony, another figure stepped forward. A tall man in a dark suit, his face gaunt, his smile thinner than glass. His presence chilled the air itself. Meridian Biotech. Oliver's stomach twisted. He had seen this man once before, on a glossy magazine cover in his father's office. A rival executive. A predator. Vivian handed him a folder. Even from a distance, Oliver recognized it. The leather-bound file from his father's study. Ruby's pencil scratched furiously, sketching the man's sharp features, the angle of his jaw, the hungry set of his eyes. When she glanced at Oliver, her hand flew in quick signs. "This is proof. If we show your dad," but Oliver didn't reply. His chest was tight, his eyes locked on Vivian. She was laughing now, low and rich, leaning closer to the man. She looked alive in a way she never did with Theodore. It wasn't the laugh of a wife. It was the laugh of someone who knew she held the knife and the other person's back was turned. The man slipped a slim envelope into her hand. Money, perhaps, or worse. Vivian's eyes gleamed as she tucked it away. Oliver's hand trembled. This was it. The proof. If his father could just see, then it happened of us. He hadn't seen it in the dark, perched precariously near the corner of the balcony. His elbow brushed it. It tipped, wobbled, and fell. The crash split the night like thunder. Ruby's eyes went wide with panic. She yanked Oliver back against the wall as Vivian's head snapped around, her crimson lips parting. Her gaze swept the balcony, sharp as a blade. Oliver held his breath, every muscle rigid. Vivian stepped closer to the sound, her heels clicking softly against the marble. The Meridian Man lingered in the shadows, his face unreadable but his posture sharp with suspicion. Ruby's hand found Oliver's in the dark. She squeezed hard, her nails digging into his palm. Don't move. Don't breathe. Vivian stopped inches from where they crouched, her perfume thick in the air. She tilted her head, scanning the darkness. For a heartbeat, Oliver swore her eyes met his. Cold, knowing. Then with a slow, deliberate smile, she turned back to her guest. Probably the wind, she murmured, her voice low, velvety. Her lips curled into something dangerous. This house has too many ghosts. She led the man back inside, the doors closing softly behind them. Only then did Oliver exhale. His chest ached, his palms were slick with sweat. Ruby was shaking, though she tried to grin as she held up her notebook. The rough sketch of the man scrawled across the page. "We have him," she signed, her fingers fierce with triumph. "We have her." But Oliver didn't smile. The look Vivian had given, whether imagined or real, lingered in his mind. That slow, deliberate smile, as if she knew exactly who had been hiding in the shadows, as if she were letting him live, just long enough to make the game more interesting. The Sullivan mansion woke each day under Vivian's rule. It was subtle, like perfume lingering in the air long after the woman had left her room, but it was there all the same. Servants moved more carefully when she was near. Theodore's temper rose faster, though his wife's soft voice always soothed him before the storm broke. Even Oliver's toys, once scattered through the sitting room, had been banished upstairs as though childhood itself had no place in Vivian's ordered world. Oliver noticed it all. He always noticed. That was his curse and his gift. Since the midnight meeting, he had been haunted by the way Vivian's gaze seemed to slice through the dark, her slow smile curling like smoke. Maybe she had seen him, maybe not. But Oliver no longer felt like a boy hiding in the shadows. He felt like prey. And prey had only two choices: keep running or learn to fight back. Ruby sat cross-legged on the carpet of his room, her copper curls a wild halo in the morning light. She flipped through her notebook, showing Oliver the sketch of the Meridian Man again. "We can't just sit here," she signed, her hands quick and firm. "We need to use what we have. You can do things I can't. You notice things. You read lips. You see what others miss." Oliver stared at her, unsure. What good does that do if no one listens? Ruby leaned closer, her eyes fierce. "Then we don't ask them to listen. We make them see." Her certainty struck him harder than any word his father had ever failed to say. That afternoon, while Vivian prowled the halls in a silk dress that shimmered like a snake's skin, Ruby and Oliver tested their plan. They trailed her at a distance, slipping behind corners, hiding behind drapes. Oliver watched her lips intently. Words like shipment, investors, and cover-up spilled from her crimson mouth in fragments he pieced together like shards of broken glass. Ruby scribbled them in her notebook. Together they were collecting a puzzle no adult had thought them capable of solving. But the more they uncovered, the more dangerous it became. Vivian was changing. Oliver saw it in the way she looked at him now. Longer, sharper, as though trying to decide how much he knew. She began insisting he sit closer at dinner, her hand brushing his shoulder with a tenderness that burned like acid. To Theodore, she was the picture of maternal patience. To Oliver, her touch was a reminder. "I own this house. I own your silence." That night, Ruby signed furiously in the glow of the bedside lamp. "She's testing you. She wants to know if you'll break. That means she's scared of you." Oliver's small fists clenched. Scared of him? He had never imagined anyone could fear him. He was the boy no one spoke to, the child passed over, dismissed, unseen. But Ruby's words struck deep. Maybe his silence wasn't a prison. Maybe it was a shield. Or better yet, a weapon. The plan grew bolder. If Vivian's crime hid in whispers and stolen papers, they would drag it into the light where whispers couldn't survive. They wouldn't beg Theodore to listen. They would force him to watch. But plans are fragile things, especially when built by children. A storm rolled in the next evening, thunder rattling the stained glass windows. The mansion felt alive with its own heartbeat, shadows stretching and recoiling in the flicker of lightning. Oliver and Ruby crept once more toward Vivian's study, intent on planting a piece of evidence where she would be forced to retrieve it in front of witnesses. Ruby carried the sketch of the Meridian Man, tucked into her backpack like a secret weapon. They had almost reached the study door when the air shifted. The perfume struck first, sharp and unmistakable. Vivian was already there. She stood in the doorway, framed by lightning, her silk gown catching the flash like a blade. Her eyes found Oliver instantly, then flicked to Ruby. For the first time she looked not surprised, not curious, but amused. My, she said slowly, her lips forming the words with perfect clarity. What do we have here? Ruby froze. Oliver's blood ran cold, and then Vivian did something that shattered the world he thought he knew. She raised her hands. And she signed. You should be in bed, Oliver. The words were flawless, sharp, and deliberate. She had known sign language all along. She had always known. Oliver's breath caught. Every moment of being ignored, every struggle to be understood, every time she had tilted her head and pretended not to follow, it had been a lie. A cruel, calculated lie to keep him silent, to keep him powerless. Ruby's eyes widened, her gaze snapping from Vivian to Oliver in horror. Vivian's smile spread, crimson and cruel. She signed again, slower this time, savoring each gesture. Now tell me, what exactly do you think you're doing in my house? The storm raged outside, thunder splitting the night. Inside, beneath the serpent's gaze of Vivian Sullivan, Oliver realized that the game was no longer about hiding. It was about survival. The Sullivan mansion glittered again, this time for a dinner Theodore deemed historic. The ballroom blazed with chandeliers, the scent of roasted lamb and expensive wine heavy in the air. Investors, partners, and board members gathered in clusters, their voices weaving together in a hum of greed and ambition. Tonight was meant to be the night Theodore announced the future of Sullivan Pharmaceuticals, a merger that promised riches beyond imagination, and Vivian moved through the room like a queen on her throne. Her silk gown gleamed silver under the lights, her crimson lips fixed in a smile so polished it blinded. She laughed easily, touched arms lightly, poured wine with grace. She was the perfect hostess, flawless in every detail. No one would ever guess the venom beneath the surface. No one but Oliver. He sat at the far end of the table, his small form nearly swallowed by the high-backed chair. To the guests, he was decoration, a courtesy inclusion. Theodore, distracted and weary, barely glanced at him, but Oliver's eyes were sharp. His silence was steady. Ruby sat nearby, disguised as the neighbor's child invited out of pity. She clutched her backpack under the table, her fingers resting on the notebook inside. Tonight, they would end this. Vivian's gaze swept the room, landing on Oliver. For a fraction of a second, her smile faltered. A warning shimmered in her eyes. Stay quiet. The silent message struck like ice. But Oliver didn't flinch. He met her gaze head-on. Theodore rose, his glass in hand. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice heavy with the weight of legacy. Tonight I present not only the future of Sullivan Pharmaceuticals, but the future of medicine itself. Oliver stood. The clink of silverware, the hum of voices. Even Theodore's speech fell silent at the suddenness of the boy's movement. He rarely drew attention to himself, and the room noticed. Ruby slipped the notebook from her bag, sliding it toward Oliver. Her eyes blazed with unspoken courage. Now, Oliver's hands began to move. He signed in sharp, deliberate motions, his small body trembling but his eyes fierce. At first, the room didn't understand. Guests shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward Theodore. Some chuckled, mistaking the child's gestures for play, but Ruby stood too. Her voice rang out clear and defiant. He's telling you what your wife has done. The room stilled. Oliver's fingers flew faster. Ruby translated, her words carrying through the ballroom like a blade. She stole files from his office. She gave them to Meridian Biotech. The trials failed. The drug is dangerous. She's selling it anyway. Gasps broke the air. Heads turned, eyes widened. Theodore's glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the marble floor. Vivian's smile didn't crack. It froze. Too perfect, too still. as though any movement might shatter the mask. "That's absurd," she purred finally, her voice calm, even amused. "He's a child. He doesn't understand what he's seen. And this girl—" Her gaze sliced toward Ruby, cold and disdainful. "An intruder, making up stories." But Oliver wasn't finished. His hands moved again, quick and certain. Ruby's voice rose, shaking but strong. "She knows sign language. She's always known. She's been pretending not to understand him. She lied to all of you, that did it." The room erupted in whispers. Faces turned toward Vivian with suspicion, some with shock, some with dawning recognition. And then Oliver reached into Ruby's notebook, pulling free the sketch. The man from Meridian Biotech stared up from the page, his sharp features captured in pencil lines. Oliver slammed it onto the table, his small fist trembling against the paper. For the first time, Vivian's mask cracked. The color drained from her face, her breath hitched, and in her eyes flickered something raw and dangerous. Fury. Theodore's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and trembling. "Vivian, is it true?" The silence that followed was unbearable. Vivian's lips parted, but no sound came. She looked at Theodore, at the board members, at the sketch on the table. Then her eyes landed on Oliver. For a single, terrible moment, she let the mask drop entirely. Her hands moved subtly at her side, where only Oliver could see. "You will regret this." But it was too late. Theodore had seen enough. The board members murmured of betrayal, of lawsuits, of prison. A storm of consequence gathered in the glittering ballroom. But Oliver barely heard it. He was locked on Vivian, who stared back with venom barely contained behind painted lips. Ruby slipped her hand into his. She was trembling, but she squeezed tightly, grounding him. For once, Oliver was not invisible. For once, every eye in the room was on him. And for once, silence was not his prison, it was his power.